East Lothian, Edinburgh's coast and countryside, has so much to offer. With 40 miles of stunning coastline and gentle rolling landscape, it's the perfect place to relax and enjoy the great outdoors. Hello, I'm Fat, and in this travel podcast series, I'll be chatting to experts to help you discover the hidden gems, the finest food and drink, and the coastal treasures. Plus, we'll be stepping back in time to hear about the historical wonders right here in East Lothian. Welcome to the Visit East Lothian podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Alasdair Northrop. He's a professional blue badge tourist guide here, so knows a thing or two about East Lothian. Alasdair, hello.
Hi there.
So now we're specifically focusing on those less well-known hidden gems that only the locals know about. A real insider's guide. Our first hidden gem features in the films Mary Queen of Scots and Outlaw King, doesn't it?
Yes, Seacliff Beach and Harbour are just a couple of miles out of North Berwick and really are a hidden jewel. This lovely sandy beach was used in the recent Mary Queen of Scots film with Mary and her ladies waiting to look out to sea while speaking to one another in French. And it also features in Outlaw King, which starred Chris Pine as King Robert the Bruce. On the western side of the beach is an extraordinary tiny harbour which was carved out of the rocks in the 19th century by the then owner Andrew Laird, and it's said to be the smallest harbour in Scotland, still used occasionally. It also has fabulous views of the ruins of Tantallon Castle on the cliff nearby. The beach and estate were used as a staging post for various raids on Tantallon Castle from the 14th to 17th century, and troops were stationed there to prevent landings by the French during the Napoleonic Wars in 1798. There are also terrific views from the beach to Bass Rock, which is home to 150,000 gannets from spring to autumn. One of its occupants in the 8th century was a saint called Baldred, who is said to have died in the island, and he helped to bring Christianity to East Lothian, but took frequent retreats to the Bass. When he died, there was a dispute between the parishes of Alden, Tinningham, Prestonkirk about where he should be buried, and the story goes that after a night of prayer, 3 identical bodies were found, each wrapped in its winding sheet ready for burial. And the story was probably a later invention intended to explain why all 3 churches established shrines to St. Baldred. There's a monument to him on the east side of the beach, and incidentally, Robert Louis Stevenson was related to the Dale family, who still own and farm much of the land around Seacliff today.
So I'm assuming when you're there, people are taking lots and lots and lots of pictures, because it sounds like a place with lots of history, but also a very beautiful place too.
It's absolutely stunning. I was there the other day, and I just had my camera just snapping away. It's just so beautiful.
The next hidden gem is a short drive from Seacliff. Tell us about Smeaton Estate and what we'll be able to experience there.
Well, one of the most amazing sights in this lowland estate is a field full of pretty Highland cows. I like to surprise guests who just don't expect to see them so close to Edinburgh. It also features a lovely lakeside walk through woodland, though sadly that's temporarily closed at the moment because of storm damage, but will be open soon. The lake was created by the Laird of Smeaton in 1820, and the collection of trees around the lake has earned it a place in the National Tree Collection of Scotland, and you can still walk through the grounds, which have lovely views of the area. And once you've enjoyed a walk, you can go and enjoy home-baked cakes and scones at the award-winning tea room at the Smeaton Nursery Garden. Just down the road is the 18th century Preston Mill. It's a very picturesque watermill building and worked commercially until 1959. National Trust of Scotland run it now, and fans of the Outlander TV series will recognise it as the place where Jamie hid in the water from the Redcoats.
My goodness, I mean, this is the thing that always fascinates people, locals more so, that they don't quite appreciate how many nooks and crannies of our country is on massive TV shows around the world that people recognise.
Absolutely. Yeah, East Lothian regularly features in TV shows. Here in North Berwick, they filmed scenes for The Railway Man, which starred Colin Firth, and Case Histories. I don't know if you remember that TV series, filmed for the BBC. That was filmed here in North Berwick too. So, yeah, lots of filming going on in East Lothian and, of course, Scotland overall.
Now, Alasdair, if I was to say footbridge to enchantment, what would you tell me?
Well, I would tell you it's a spectacular bridge. The great Scottish novelist Nigel Tranter came up with that description for a bridge that enables you to visit the very first ever nature reserve in Britain. It was designated back in 1952, 70 years ago, and it's a paradise for birdwatchers. Nigel used to walk across the bridge every day and write his novel as he walked. For people visiting East Lothian in late autumn and during the winter, you can see the spectacular sight of 30,000 pink-footed geese flying onto this huge salt marsh and estuary. They sort of fly in these huge V formations. And just down the road is the headquarters of the Scottish Ornithological Society, which you can also visit. It's got regular exhibitions of wildlife paintings there.
And then there's a walk to a really impressive beach, isn't there, with something special to see at low tide. Tell us a bit about that.
Absolutely. After you've crossed the bridge, you follow a footpath through the nature reserve, and it leads eventually to a huge set of sand dunes. And on the other side is Aberlady Bay Beach, which is massive and just really beautiful. At low tide, you can walk a long way out towards the west, and you will find the remains of two mini submarines. Now, these 52 feet long submarines were built during the Second World War, and some of them were used in a daring operation to sink the German ship Tirpitz in a Norwegian fjord in 1943. The submarines on the beach, amazingly, would have had a four-man crew in their active days. They were put there on the beach in 1946 so that aircraft on exercise could fire at them and test the effectiveness of 20mm cannon shells against the submarine's steel hulls. And despite all that bombardment, you can still clearly recognize their submarines when you get up to them. It's important to make sure, though, that when you go, you've checked the tide times before you go, because you don't want to get caught out.
Let's head over to Haddington. St Mary's Pleasant Gardens are here. Is it true that these gardens date back to the 17th century?
Yeah, they're the gardens for Haddington House, which dates back to 1648. However, back in 1972, they were a wilderness and were redesigned to the specification of Sir George Taylor, who was the former director of the Royal Botanic Garden at Kew, to reflect the features of a 17th century Scottish garden. One of the highlights is a laburnum walk, and it also features period rose borders and raised herb beds, as well as an orchard. It's a gorgeous and peaceful place to visit, and nearby is the amazing St Mary's Church. Half the church had been without a roof since the siege of Haddington in the 16th century, and in the 1970s, the local community raised enough money to put on a new roof, and it became once again the longest parish church in Scotland. It's well worth visiting too.
Alasdair, tell me, what kind of people tend to visit the gardens? Because it's funny, a couple of years ago I would have thought, oh, not really for me, maybe would have found that a tad boring, but now it just sounds like something I want to spend all day. And, it's a very mixed crowd.
It's just a nice place to get away from the crowds, and beautiful gardens. It's quite spectacular. And there's a little hill you can climb to sort of overlook the gardens. And more and more people get interested in growing their own vegetables and fruit, and there's loads of apple trees in the gardens there that you can look at too, and maybe give you some ideas for trees you might grow in your own garden.
Now, another gem from the 17th century is Cockenzie House. What's the history of this place, and what can we see there today?
Yeah, well, it's a stunning building with a long history. It was built by the first Earl of Winton for his Chamberlain, David Seaton, to oversee the affairs of Cockenzie and Port Seaton Harbour, which is just around the corner, and of the local Seaton estate. David Seaton was involved in the trials of witches at Tranent as well. The old harbour at Cockenzie was also a private port for the Earls of Winton. From there, many vessels embarked to Flanders and France for trade. The house was bought in the mid-18th century by the Cadell family, who made their fortune from window making initially, but later coal. And distinguished members of the Cadell family include Sir Walter Scott's publisher, Robert Cadell, the artist Francis Cadell, and the actor Simon Cadell, who played the gormless holiday camp manager in the TV comedy Heidi High. The Cadells sold the house in 1918, and it later became a nursing home. But today it's home to many small businesses and local community buyouts underway. The house has got a really lovely cafe, as well as a craft shop and a small museum that tells the story of the house and the local area. It's also got lovely gardens, part of which were originally designed by John Reed, the author of a book published in 1683 called The Scots Gardener, which was the first gardening manual written for the climate of Scotland. And the gardens today feature a section designed to be dementia-friendly, which is seats, planters, and a bird table. So it's a really nice place to visit. Nice gardens again. The house is interesting, and great to get a nice cup of tea and a lovely piece of cake.
I mean, this is the fascinating thing. There's so many brilliant places we've already spoken about, and none of these tend to be at the top of the to-do lists or, the tourist guides, because these are more like hidden gems, aren't they, Alasdair?
Absolutely hidden away there. And the thing about that is you can go to Cockenzie House, but just around the corner are fascinating harbours that you can sort of wander along. They've got information boards that tell you about the history. You can watch the fishermen coming in. You can buy fresh lobster. You can do all sorts of things around there, but there's not many people around there on a sort of general basis. So it is very much a hidden jewel.
So let's talk about a fantastic view now. A view of the Firth of Forth at Dunbar Harbour. Why is this place such a hidden gem? Surely people would know about this.
Well, I took an American couple there just a few days ago on a tour, and they were totally blown away by the views and the atmosphere as well. The harbour is overlooked by the ruins of a castle which was once visited by Mary Queen of Scots and her lover, the Earl of Bothwell. It's also fun looking at the fishing boats and seeing what's going on, but the place I particularly like is Dunbar Battery. It was originally built to protect Dunbar during the Napoleonic Wars, but no guns were ever fired in anger. Later in the 19th century, it became a fever hospital and was used right until 1920s. And then in the 1930s, the buildings were pulled down, and the site, though, has been recently restored. And not only do you get great views of the Firth of Forth from it, and we saw cormorants close by last time I was there, but there's also a small outdoor theatre space for performances and events.
Oh, brilliant. And do you get regular shows there? Or
Yeah. There's various festivals that take place in Dunbar, and there's a local theatre group that puts on the performances. If you can actually get to a website in Dunbar that will tell you about what's coming up there.
Oh, do you know, I always love the atmosphere of seeing a show at an amphitheatre, but then you realise the reason it's not that common here in Scotland is always the weather, of course.
We have beautiful weather all the time, as you know.
Said no one ever. So,
yeah.
Last but not least, what about a hidden gem for a rainy day? You know, there's a Coastal Communities Museum in North Berwick, isn't there? You know, what artefacts can we discover inside? What's that like?
Well, there are lots of interesting things to see, but one of the standouts is a rather terrifying mask of a guy called Alexander Pedden. He was a Covenanting preacher. The Covenanters were 17th century churchgoers who objected to the King of Britain, Charles I, imposing an English-style way of worship on the Scots, and they signed a covenant, and the whole thing erupted into a civil war and a revolution which resulted in Scotland and England becoming a republic. But when the crown was restored, Charles II alienated the Covenanters once again, and Pedden led illegal services in the open air. He wore a version of the mask on show at the museum for 11 years to avoid being recognised as he travelled the country preaching. He was captured in 1673 and imprisoned for 4 years on the Bass Rock. It must have been absolutely horrendous, and he amazingly survived. He was later released, and there were plans to transport him overseas, but he managed to avoid that, and he died at home on the west coast of Scotland in 1686. His story inspired the tale of Todd Laprague in the novel Katrina by Robert Louis Stevenson, of course, who spent a lot of time here in East Lothian. He spent his summer holidays at North Berwick. So the museum also has got other items, including a beach hut dating back to the early 1900s. They were a regular feature of summer holidays in North Berwick, and several local firms produce them. But one of the original huts made in the early 1900s is on display there. So you can see that and get a taste of times gone by. And the museum itself reopens on April the 22nd after its winter break.
Oh, fantastic. So that sounds like another brilliant place to go. Alasdair, you mentioned some American tourists that you were with recently. Tell me about tourists from less known places around the world that visit and that you tour around with.
Well, I've toured with various people from South America and obviously from the Far East, the Philippines. The thing about Scotland is that people, it's just so well known around the world, and everybody sort of associates it with tartan and whiskey and haggis. We've got some great ways of sort of selling ourselves, and then they come here and they realise it's actually far more than tartan, whiskey and haggis. There's just so much to see in this very small country, and East Lothian is a microcosm of this wonderful country.
It really is. And if you had to pick your favourite hidden gem from the many places that you've listed, which one would it be?
Ooh, that's difficult, but I suppose it'd probably be Seacliff Beach. I just think it's such a lovely place to go and visit. And when you go to a beach, it's always different every time you go.
And Alasdair, why is East Lothian so special to you?
Well, East Lothian is so special to me because in a comparatively small area, there's just so much to enjoy. As well as the wonderful beaches, there are lots of really interesting little towns and villages steeped in history. And above all, I love the colours of the landscape and the big sky. Living by the coast, you're very aware of how much variety there can be. One day I was walking along the coast and ahead of me was a bright blue sky, and behind me the sky was dark and foreboding. It was just breathtaking. So that's why I love it so much.
Oh, fantastic stuff. Alasdair, you're a star. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. You can head over to visiteastlothian.org to discover even more unique experiences right here within minutes from Edinburgh. And don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast so more people can discover the true beauty of East Lothian. I'll see you next time.